Now that we know that there are 8 room access cards issued in Paddock's name, the next thing that becomes important is how were they used to access the rooms. And as you recall, there were 2 rooms, room 134 and 135. Paddock checked into room 135 on the 25th and room 134 a couple of days later. So the FIT report itself contains 2 appendixes, A and B, and these are what's known as the Lock Interrogation Reports. Each report is something that was generated, I would presume, from the historical or database that is maintained on the Invisalign servers, Invisalign being the software that maintains all the information about the locks and the events and commands sent to them and all that. Without going into great detail about how everything works, suffice it to say that the locks on the rooms are designed to be independent units. That is, they're battery operated. They don't need anything to come along and maintain them in terms of daily activity. You install the lock, you program up the lock, it has electronics inside it, and the ones at Mandalay Bay are RFID, the proximity center. You get the card close and it can interface to the card and read it. And inside of the lock are stored the access control lists, i.e. which cards are valid. And then there's this general concept that if a new card comes along from a new guest, and it's encoded such that it's recognized as a new guest for the room, then the older guest will be either erased, overwritten, or the new card will be added into the current set of people who can access the room. Now, the Mandalay Bay has chosen to do the online version of those locks, and the locks are manufactured by a company called, it's really 2 companies that merged together. One is Vingcard, V-I-N-G-C-A-R-D. It's I think it's a Norwegian company that had been in the business a long time, and then it finally merged or was assumed by a larger distributor known as Abloy or something like that. Let's see, I have the name somewhere. Let's see. ASA Abloy, there we go. And the card make and model or general manufacturer is Vingcard. We actually know the make and model of the cards. It's the lock control unit 6333. And there's a lot of guts and contents to these locks, but they really tend to want to do their own thing, and they don't need a lot of talking to outside things. But like I said before, Mandalay Bay chose to go with the online version of those locks, and that is they have a small radio frequency wireless network communication that talks to a device that's somewhere in the ceilings close by, less than 100 feet away, and the lock will either send information to that device or receive information from the device. And there's a lot of commands that can be exercised both up and down, and there's a lot of events that can be sent both up and down. For example, if the door is left ajar, then the lock control unit inside, after 49 minutes, sends a message to the Invisalign software, which is eventually where all this stuff goes, saying that the door's been ajar. But for other things, like just recording the events that occur internal to the locking mechanism, door closed, door open from the inside, deadbolt thrown, deadbolt released, all those things are stored internally up to 2,000 events, which, golly, depending upon how often the room is used, that could be an entire month's worth. However, Invisalign can be configured, and the locks can be configured so that the events are transferred immediately, but the wireless network known as Zigbee is really designed to be a low power network, and so the whole concept is to keep the radio transmitter off as much as possible to conserve energy. So it's up to Visalign software to manage that. If there's something they need, then they can come along and issue a command to the door lock through the wireless Zigbee network to read the contents, and that you can see in the Lock Interrogation Report. Let's just go right over to the raw form of the Lock Interrogation Report. What I've done is take the PDF documents inside of the FIT report is a PDF document, and they just show you pages of stuff. I took all that information. There were two reports, one for room 134, one for room 35. I did optical character recognition on it and corrected it, and then entered it into an Excel spreadsheet. And so once you have it in an Excel spreadsheet or in any digital form, you can do a lot of different things with it. Here we see it in a Excel spreadsheet. I have various pieces of software which I wrote in Python to analyze this stuff, because it's never sufficient to take one view on your data. You always have to have multiple views, multiple ways of verifying the integrity of the data. But tonight we're going to be addressing the question of when were the guest cards used on those rooms, and I'm going to be doing the analysis with Excel because it's something anyone can do who has any knowledge of Excel if they have the data set. So here we see the data set, which are the two reports combined. And very briefly, the types of events that get recorded fall into three broad categories. One, as I mentioned, are online commands, where here you can see that on the second at 7:35 a.m. for room 135, a readout was done, and that's the Visalign software coming along and issuing a command to the door lock to read some sort of content from the door lock for room 135, and then the door lock would transmit the information back. Now there's various different things that can be read, and pretty detailed stuff, and I won't go into it. So multiple readouts may be required to read the complete lock event logs. You can also read the configurations, you can read the battery level, all that sort of stuff. You can also, through here we see a ping command that basically sends much like you see in submarines when they say one ping please, it sends out a signal to the device, and then if the device responds, the guy on the other end knows that the device, in this case the lock, is alive. Okay, so anyway, you have online commands, then you have events as the second general category that are generated by the locking mechanism itself, and those fall into the category of door open, close, deadbolt, all that sort of stuff. And then the third category of events are attempts to access the lock through a card. And one type of event there, the subcategory, is guest, and the other category is staff. And these are recorded in slightly different fashions. But for the guest and for the staff, we have four fields out here which indicates who issued it, in this case Jay Wheeler, who it was issued to, and then some sort of ID. Now for guests, this all makes sense. Okay, so in this case, on the at 9:33 p.m. on the 1st, a guest card was presented to the reader, and it was accepted. And this is room 135. And that card was encoded as being issued to Stephen Paddock with 764152919 ID, and that card was issued by Jay Wheeler. And you can see that there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here in a short region. and some of them were not accepted. So for example, here on line 10, we see, on line 12, we were on line, well, line is we'll use, there's two indexes here. One comes from the Lock Interrogation Report. We'll refer to the Excel line. So on line 12, row 12, we see that we have a different ID number, but otherwise all the other information is the same. So that's a different set of cards. And if we look carefully, we see that we have, let's see, 2919 and 2965. 2965, 2965, 2919. So we have just two different unique sets of cards here. Now, the way that the cards are issued, from everything that I gather, when a person checks in, all cards that are issued to one person are the same as far as the lock interrogation information is presented. So if Paddock had received 5 cards issued by Jay Wheeler on the same time in the same hour, they would appear, and he used each one on the lock, they would all appear to be the same card here. They cannot be distinguished. So when you see this, you can't tell whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 5 cards. But when they have different IDs, then they were issued, most likely issued at a different time or for a different room. So in this case, since we have 2 different IDs, then we can assume that there were 2 times at which those cards were issued. So that raises the question then of what do we look for here? What are we looking for? We're looking for when, well, number 1, how many cards were applied against the doors? Because we have 8 in the room. Were all 8 applied against it? Were less applied against it? Were there cards that were issued to Paddock that we don't know about? And those are the questions, the fundamental questions to answer. And so we can't really do a lot of work on this level in detail without having some aid, and the aid I will be using is coloring. So first, what I'm going to do is eliminate from this set of data all door unit internal commands, because all I want to look at are the guests and the staff and all the other commands. And so I do that, and then I end up with a limited subset of the events from the Lock Interrogation Report, i.e. we don't have any of the open, closed, deadbolt released, deadbolt engaged or released. And to make it a little easier, I've encoded room 134 here in red in the column that records the room number. Alright, now if I shrink that down, you can see that the first occurrence of a room 134 event was on this line in row 155, and it occurred on the 29th at shortly after noon, and it was a guest card. Oh, excuse me, a staff card. Okay, well that's not Paddock. So then we looked for the first guest card. Yeah. Here we see some, here's an online command applied against room 134 where a previous card had been canceled. It was issued to Gosh, somebody named Gosh, no, Langen or whatever. Okay, but what we're looking for is Paddock's cards. Well, rather than looking at them manually, I went ahead and applied more coloring. So let's take a look at the colored version, which now becomes a much easier to examine. So before we get into examine it, I'll explain what I did. First and foremost, I separated out the days with these large gray lines so that we can easily see the day boundaries. Then what I did over here in column D, which is the group number for the card, or group mnemonic for the card, I colored them. And Paddock's will have a unique color for each unique grouping of cards, and there ended up being 4 unique groupings of cards. One is in the red, one is in the green, one is in the purple, and one is in the orange. Okay, and so we can look at this column and see immediately that the first occurrence of a paddock use of a guest card occurred against room 135. It occurred at 22:52. Oh, that's not right, because, oh, there we go, up there, I missed one. Okay, the first occurrence of a card by paddock occurred against room 135, and it occurred at 5:02 p.m. on the 25th. And let's make sure that that is Paddock over there. Yep. And Stephen Paddock, issued by J. Wheeler. All right. That's good, and the card was accepted. So here we have an event in the Lock Interrogation Report verifying that a card, or a card group, was used to gain access or entry to room 135. What was the next one? It was on the next day, which would be the 26th, at 10:52. Though that's quite a time gap. I'm sorry, there's a train coming by. All right. So the second occurrence of a card was again against room 135, and it occurred at, I said there, card was accepted. The next occurrence, again, the red one, which is the same group of cards, occurred on the next day at 7:18 in the morning, and it was accepted, and then we had some staff. So the thing to look at here is these colorings. When was the first event of each coloring? When was the first red? When was the first green? When was the first purple? And when was the first orange? Because each of those is a different grouping, and as we see, there are 4 different colors. Okay, we have 8 cards and 4 different groupings of colors. Now, each group of cards, since it's unique, either in ID or issuing person, represents a trip to get a card, i.e. those cards have to be picked up from somewhere. So if we look here, we can see that the first use of a card, the green cards, was against room 134 at 3:09, which is approximately the time that Paddock checked into room 134. This was on the 29th. Up until then, all he had been using are the red cards. I called them Group 4A later. And then the next color, which is purple, is applied against room 135, and that occurred on the morning of the 30th at 6:03. And then the final color, did I say 134? Oh, well, made a slight mistake there. The purple was applied against 135, but it was rejected. No access to this room. So what we really want to know is which room that card was issued against. And so we have to look for an accepted. Well, if we look right here, we see that the purple card applied against room 134 was rejected here because the door unit was deadbolted. So that means that the card was a valid card for room 134. However, the door was deadbolted and could not gain access. So purple is for room 134. Green is for room 134 because it was accepted. Red is for room 135. And here the orange is for room 135 because on the 30th at 6:12, 9 minutes after room 134 card was used, it was accepted for room 135. And that completes the sum total of the number of different cards, unique cards or card groupings. There are 4, 2 for room 134, 2 for room 135. Alright, so what does that mean? Well, we're going to get into that in a little bit here, but first let's summarize it. I have a table over here somewhere, and that table, let's see, where do I have that table? Table first uses. Alright. Here we see that I've gone ahead and compiled the list of the first uses of each card in a group. And we have a name that I've given to them. 5A would be the first group for room 135. 5B would be the first group or second group for 135. 4A first group for 134. 4B for 134. And we can see that there are 4 different people issuing the cards. Here we have 2 sets issued by Wheeler, one by C. Orpila and one by C. Colton. Oddly enough, these are sorted in time of use. The last 2 here, issued by 2 different people, occurred on the 30th in the morning. Oops, the first use here, in the morning, 9 minutes apart. Now, to get these cards, they had to be visiting the VIP at some point in time. Now, these are the first uses. We don't really know when these cards were issued, but their first use were very, very close together on the 30th. So this table tells us that we have 4 unique sets of cards. Well, we have 8 cards total. And the simplest approach to looking at it would be to assume that there are 2 cards per grouping. So you walk up to the counter, you check into your room, and they give you 2 identical cards for the room. And you can't tell the difference between the 2 from the Lock Interrogation Report. I'm sure they can tell the difference by looking at a sequence number encoded into the card. But the takeaway from this is that Paddock made 4 trips to the VIP counter, or to somewhere, to get these cards. If we assume that the time at which he received the cards is close to the time at which the first use occurred, then we have a scenario here on the 30th where he visited the desk, probably at the VIP booth, very, very close together, very, very early in the morning. Why? Why does he need more cards? He already had 4, 2 for each room. So this must be some sort of scenario in which Paddock was forced to acquire cards twice in less than 15 minutes. You could argue that, well, he had 8 cards all along, but that doesn't seem to follow. And furthermore, what we'll do now is look at the series of events that occurred associated with these cards. But for this segment, the takeaway is that we have 4 sets of cards, 2 cards in each set, and they were gained by Paddock from visiting the VIP 4 times, and you have 3 different people who issued them. The thing to note that's interesting here is that Mr. Wheeler always issued cards in the afternoon, and that these 2 people were early morning. And the fact that there were 2 different people in my book implies that one person was before 6 a.m. and one was after 6 a.m. So you have to look at the 30th to see what occurred, to figure out what's really going on with these things. And that's what we'll do in the next little segment here.
you.